It is your host, E.I. Smith. Today's date is Wednesday, May the 8th, 2019. The time is 5:33 p.m. and I'm on the corner of Lincoln Road and 17th Street. I'm going to get some gang stalking caught on camera for you tonight. Be looking for obstruction of movement, synchronized space crowding, and an abundance of public service vehicles, including police vehicles. Let's go.
Let's go.
Walking down Lincoln Road, I experienced a strong influx of space crowding, and I figured I'd start videotaping. And as you can see, Lincoln Road is a very short street in and of itself. It only goes down maybe 50 yards past that bus. So just since I started this video, I've walked about half the distance of Lincoln Road. Now, the Lincoln Road Mall extends down this walkway here for quite a while, more than a mile, and it's basically an outdoor shopping attraction. Now, I'd like to make note of these police vehicles, and I'm gonna get up close here, because as I was walking down that way, I experienced a extraordinary influx of space crowding. And I've said in previous videos and demonstrated in previous videos that the most gang stalking activity rears its ugly head when there are plenty of police present. Now, this is done by gang stalking participants at the upper echelons, and here we see a police cruiser pass by as I'm walking. Just as I started walking, they start leaving. That's synchronization. And okay, and then we see a taxi as I'm coming down here. I've done previous videos on the prevalence of taxis and gang stalking campaigns, and trust me, it's not because they're trying to give you a ride or advertise their services to you personally. It's to annoy you and intimidate you. And notice how as soon as I get to this bus stop, there's 1, 2, 3 public service vehicles, namely public transportation vehicles, that are meeting me. Now, I wanted to get that sequence caught on camera, because if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Whoever the orchestrators of gang stalking are, like to turn up the heat on the targeted individual when there are public service employees present. Police, firefighters, ambulance, and metro buses and trolleys. Although trolleys are to a lesser degree because they are not driven by public employees. They're driven by private employees that work for a private company that is contracted by Miami Beach for public transportation. Now, that is what I wanted to show you, is that whoever it is that orchestrates these gang stalking campaigns and whoever it is that stages targeted individuals does so expressly and exclusively when there are police vehicles and other public works vehicles present, so as to further vex the targeted individual into thinking that gang stalking is a protected practice, but it's not. The reason these gang stalkers are planted around police vehicles and so forth, and public service employees, is because the orchestrators of gang stalking, that's the services and organizations that plant gang stalkers in the vicinity of a targeted individual and instigate interactions between gang stalkers and a targeted individual know that what they do annoys the targeted individual to no end. And they want plenty of police to be around, firefighters, EMS, metro buses, and trolleys, public works employees around in case the targeted individual defends himself by force. They want to make that targeted individual look like a deranged, violent criminal. So that's why they do that when there's police and other public service people around. Now, I wanted to get that on tape because, again, I was on Lincoln Road, headed down this street here, and I saw an incredible influx of gang stalking activity. And I knew right then and there that it was because there were public service vehicles and or police around. And I wanted to capture them on camera. And I did capture them on camera. Listen to what I'm saying and analyze the circumstances carefully and objectively. And I've said that and documented that in previous videos. When you see an influx of gang stalking activity and it is idiotic, buffoonish, and rude, when you see it to the maximum, the way I just saw on Lincoln, there are public works people present. It's done to make the TI think that the government is on the side of the gang stalkers. And at this point, I really don't know who the side the government is on. That's not my concern. My concern is documenting this. Some synchronized space crowding there. Just as I get to a location, there's somebody coming. That's never coincidental. And I'm not sitting right here. That ticked me off. And that's part of what the gang stalkers like to do, is they like to do little stuff like that. From time to time, I like to go to that Starbucks and use the Wi-Fi, get some water, and just hang out. And since my movements are tracked the way they are, they sent some idiot around to cut me off right there as soon as I was getting ready to sit down. Okay? That shows how gang stalking works generally. They track your movements, they watch you, and then they do things to disrupt you. Okay? And I was not about to sit down next to that idiot who just pulled that gang stalking move on me. I'm going to keep walking. That's one thing they like to do. They like to make you change your plans, change your movement, change your direction. I've said before that I believe that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is behind a lot of the street level harassment, the likes of which you just saw, and I maintain that. You can look through my Gang Stalking in Action live video series on Twitter. Look in the moments section and click on the videos link, and you'll see the one where I talk about the Mormon Church in specific. And I believe that their gang stalking operations are vast, and I've given the reasons as to why. They have resources, monetary, surveillance, intelligence, military, police access, as well as a certain uber patriotism that the kinds of gang stalkers I run into would find endearing. All of that stuff is coming out of that church. They're in 161 countries. They're an international conglomerate. A lot of the male members in that church adhere to a fascist political ideology and believe in fascism and in population control through whatever corrupt means are available to them. How do I know this? I was a member of the church for 2.5 years before resigning, and I experienced some of the most egregious gang stalking you could ever imagine while a member of that church. And it's continued since I left. And I've said in other instances that when I first started really noticing gang stalking presences around me, I started noticing lots of Mormon missionaries around me as well, riding their bikes, up and down my street or wherever I was. I could be at the library, I could be at the grocery store, I could be anywhere, and I'd see Mormon missionaries everywhere. I saw Jehovah's Witnesses a lot during this time period, but it was mostly at my front door. I'd get maybe 2 or 3 knocks on my door a month and always tell them no, because I was never interested in that church or joining it or having anything to do with it whatsoever. And the same was true with the Mormons. I'd been approached by quite a few Mormon missionaries in my day, and there's another Starbucks right down the street. This is actually a nicer one. I actually prefer this one. I've just been walking for a while and wanted to sit down. But I started noticing Mormon missionaries everywhere I went, and I don't consider it a coincidence that when I saw heightened levels of gang-stalking activity, I'd see Mormons. I ended up joining the church in the year 2015 after about a year of missionary lessons, because I didn't know anything about gang-stalking at that time, and I figured that I kept running into these Mormon missionaries for a reason. Maybe I needed to join this church, or maybe there was a divine reason that I kept running into these Mormon missionaries, but it wasn't divine. It was contrived. And I'm a much more practical thinker now, and after having done research on gang stalking and how it works, etc., what I think the Mormons were doing was they were taking advantage of the staging of a targeted individual, because it brings a lot of people out into the open. There's constantly people moving about, constantly people going back and forth. People are sitting down eating, some of them are drinking, some of them are smoking, some of them are riding bikes, skateboards, some of them are just sitting at bus stops. So finding a stage or finding a targeted individual would be advantageous for a church like the Mormon Church, because they can send missionaries over to where all the action is and try and convert people into the church and scare up some more tithe payers. So that's what I think the original influx of Mormon missionaries was in my case. Now, since I resigned from the church, I don't think I've seen, and that was about almost 2 years ago now, I don't think I've seen Mormons at all, at least not in uniform, in the Mormon missionary uniform. I'm sure they're around, but I can't identify them like I was able to before I joined the church. I maybe run into Mormon missionaries once since then, and that was 2 years ago. But before I joined the church, I ran into them absolutely everywhere. And it just became too much of a coincidence for me to ignore. And part of my reason for joining the church was investigatory. I wanted to know, what is this church's interest in me, if there is an interest? Is the fact that I keep running into Mormon missionaries a coincidence, or is it contrived? Also, what is the church's interest in gang stalking? And what kind of human capital do they have access to? I know they have 15 million members that are fiercely loyal to the church. And will do whatever the church says. So maybe gang stalking has some root in that church. I believe it does, because there are extraordinarily fascist undertones in gang stalking, especially when it comes to politics and the police. You can tell when there are political elements in your gang stalking campaign, and police elements, which I've documented at length dozens of times now. And they're very fascist. They come at me as if I don't have rights, and that comes from a racial ideology that is prevalent in the church, in the Book of Mormon, in the Doctrine and Covenants, in the early prophecies of Brigham Young, who was the second president of the church. They have a hand in this. And they have a hand in driving hate rhetoric in the United States. They have a hand in all the far-right groups that you can think of, and they give a platform for hate, not only in gang stalking, but in media outlets. Okay? They have more than enough resources and connections to do that. And they've been targeting me for a long time. I joined the church and left, and they're still targeting me. So I'm going to leave that at that. And it's funny because, and I'm going to show you a little street theater. That right there looks like the typical Mormon family right there. The woman in the dress and the guy in the white shirt and black pants holding the kid. That is typical. And a lot of Mormon dads actually hold their babies in awkward positions like that. It's a cultural thing. It doesn't put the baby in any danger, but it's something that you see when you go to a ward or a sacrament meeting, or if you go to a Bible study or elders quorum, and the father has the baby as opposed to the mother. They often hold the baby in awkward positions like you just saw. And that looked like a typical, absolutely typical Mormon family right there. And it happened just as I was talking about Mormonism. Now, in my previous video where I talked about the LDS church, there was another instance where I was talking about the church and what I thought their interests were in gang stalking, and a guy walked up to me dressed as if he were going to a Mormon baptism, as he was going to be baptized. He had on a white shirt, white pants, white socks, white shoes. That is Mormon baptismal clothing. That is the kind of clothing that you wear when you're going to be baptized into the Mormon church. So, and I ran into two other people in that same video that were dressed in all white, almost as if the Mormons were sending me a message through the gang stalking mechanism saying that they wanted me to come back to the church and be rebaptized. Okay, now, this is all stuff that I have to expound upon and get off of my chest. It hurts because at one time I thought that being a Mormon was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. But then as certain things started happening, and as I started noticing certain undertones in the church, I knew that not only was I not welcome there, but that I needed to leave. And now I am in a situation where I know there are many members of the church that are exposed to my online work, and they see the stuff that I'm saying about them. And many of these people are very likely at one time considered friends. And it hurts that, you know, they'll see this. But it's necessary. It's a necessary evil. I have to talk about this stuff because gang stalking campaigns are the antithesis of fascism. There's nothing democratic about them. They're very syndicate-like in their movements and activities, and they use the police as their bodyguards inadvertently. It's the ones at the top, the upper echelon gang stalkers, that are staging these events. And then you have the street-level gang stalkers, like that guy that just walked in front of me, who are basically acting on cues and may or may not know that they're harassing somebody. So this video was 19 minutes. I'm going to stop it here. I'm going to record another video, and that will be approximately 10 minutes long later tonight.